I read a lot of Webtoon series, like a lot of them. My Webtoon 2023 recap is embarrassingly high. I know I read a lot of them because it's my job, but look at this number. Look at it. It's hard to explain this number to a normal person. I read a lot of Webtoon series, but closing out 2023, I wanted to take a look back at some of the series that really made 2023 shine. Now, there are a ton of series, not only on Webtoon, but that specifically came out in 2023. In fact, my original plan was to talk about all of those. But no joke, 7 series came out the week I'm writing this. Yes, 7! The good news is that no matter what you're into, there's gonna be something you like. The bad news is there's no way I could talk about every series that came out this year. Actually, I can't even go through all of the series that I picked up that came out this year. Believe me, I tried. So instead, I wanted to take a look at series that really shined that came out this year. But before we get into the stars of the previous year, let's take a moment to commemorate those who left us. That wasn't In the Arms of the Angel because I'm afraid to use music. There were a lot of standout series this year. A lot that I've already talked about, but a handful that I haven't. So I thought there's no better time to look back at those standout series that came into our lives in 2023. We'll start with what my Webtoon recap says is my favorite genre, I like 2 series but who's counting, romance. Webtoon has always had some knockout romance series, and this year was no different. Honestly, I'm preferable to Villain with a Crush, an incredibly charming series. It's all about one huge misunderstanding. Rosa Parks falls in love with this superhero after he saves her life. The problem? Everyone else falls in love with him too. Yeah, this dude got simps upon simps, so when she tries to confess her feelings, she gets rejected. Not by him, mind you, but by his entire fan base. This is also when Rosa discovers her busted powers, super strength, and teleportation. And while trying to confess her feelings, she accidentally becomes the most wanted supervillain and the #1 rival of the hero she's trying to confess to? Yeah, it's one massive misunderstanding. But since the series is straight up goofy 99% of the time, you don't have this massive headache that these 2 characters aren't talking. Instead, you're too busy laughing at the wacky hijinks that this entire cast managed to get themselves into. But I guess there are technically more romantic romance series, and honestly, I'm caught between 2. Go Away Romeo and I Thought My Time Was Up. Go Away Romeo is probably my favorite retelling of Romeo and Juliet, mainly because Romeo and Juliet aren't the main characters. Instead, it's Rosalind, the girl that Romeo was into before Juliet. In the play, or in the original source material, she wanted to remain chaste or something. But in the Webtoon, they actually did have a relationship, one ending up with them having a kid. But Romeo does what Romeo's gonna do and falls in love with Juliet without anyone knowing, and then they die. But actually, it turns out Romeo and Juliet's plan did work this time, and they're kind of revealed to be the villains of the series, which is already such a cool twist on that play. Meanwhile, I Thought My Time Was Up for kind of the opposite reason. I just really love the female lead, Laria Blanche, being an absolute agent of chaos as she tries and succeeds on winning the heart of this cursed duke. It's just a really refreshing take on a female lead that I'm kind of surprised more series aren't trying to do. Well, with one notable exception for later. Now, comparatively, I haven't read a lot of slice of life or comedy. Personally, I was always more into stories rather than laughs or vibes, and my recap definitely shows that, but it doesn't mean that I can't enjoy a comedy or 2. And man, is it hard to beat Maru is a Puppy. This is a wild series, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Rui Cho lives alone with her dog Maru, and then magically Maru becomes a human. But not like this TV show that the Webtoon is purposely making fun of. Instead, Maru becomes a human child, but more accurately, a gremlin. Like how a puppy would be if a puppy became a human. So chaotic, a handful, a bit uncooperative, but very sweet and wholesome. It's a wild series, but that's definitely part of the charm. Like how no one in this series is normal, especially Maru, which is, I think, highlighted by her art style being different than every other human in the series. Watching her interactions with others, trying her best to be a dog in a human child's body, is weirdly the most wholesome and funniest thing I've read in a long time. And even some other ambassadors agree with me on that. But I know why you guys are really here. You want that action, you want that fantasy, and you know what? So do I, apparently. Yeah, 2 out of my top 3 series this year were action and fantasy. Also, I gotta say, while romance is my top series, I read way more action and fantasy episodes. Like an embarrassingly more amount. But it's usually my favorite genre, so whatever. There are some absolute bangers that came out this year. Technically speaking, I think most of my action series usually have some fantasy elements in it. Some isekai elements like Boundless Ascension, or just a straight up fantasy world, like The One Who Parried Death, which is a hilarious title. But there are some without those fantasy elements. Black Knight is basically just Death Stranding but a webtoon, and that's barely a joke. Or Killer Peter, a beautiful action series about an old man who becomes not old, and then he gets to wreck shop. And also, surprisingly, made by the same author as Unholy Blood, the vampire one a while ago. But I think there are 2 action series that really stood out to me specifically. Starting with Pantheum, which is finally an action-adventure series set in the Greek Pantheon. And it's not another romance, thank the gods. Pantheum is such a cool twist on everything you'd expect in a series about the Greek Pantheon. I actually don't really want to get into it all that much. I think it's one of those series you should go into blind. But know that I highly recommend it, and you should go read it now. Or at least when the video's over. Meanwhile, a series I actually want to get into is Rental Hero. In a world with superpowered people, Ji-won Lee's power doesn't help him all that much, only letting him take the appearance of other people. While this is a cool trickster power, he doesn't really use it for villainy, though technically his job isn't legal, as he rents his face to pretend to be heroes while they're out heroing, until a new job comes in, one from the #1 hero, All Might. Superman. Justice. His name's Justice. Justice comes in requesting his services, but on the day they're supposed to meet, Justice, the #1 hero in the world, is dead. And when checking on him, power zaps into our main character's hand. So whenever he shapeshifts into Justice, he gains his powers. And through some roundabout means, pretends to be Justice full-time to keep the peace and prosperity that Justice brought. So far, the series is a really cool and refreshing take on superheroes. And it's not as simple or kind of mundane as what if Superman was evil? But instead, there's a lot more gray in this world, which I think is really refreshing when it comes to superheroes. And at last, we get to fantasy. There are a lot of standout fantasy series. It's kind of my favorite genre, after all. So there's a lot I managed to pick up over the years. A series I'm kind of surprised I haven't talked about yet, A Life of a Quack Healer, is everything I look for in an isekai. Fun main character? Check. Interesting fantasy premise that makes it stand out compared to other isekais? Check. Cool fight scenes with interesting powers and abilities? Check. Already having a mystery set up despite only a few chapters out? Check. Our main character looking like Doksha Kim? Well, that's not usually a requirement, but I'm not going to turn it down. Our main character is a healer? And yes, that question mark is part of the job. He doesn't fantasy heal, he normal heals. He stitches, he sutures, he medicines, and more. It's a different take on a healer that I think is really cool. And of course, I'm always here for the different type of main character. Always a sucker for the cleaners, healers, and construction workers of the world, which is a weird combination of things that only makes sense for a very specific amount of people. I also wanted to quickly mention World's Strongest Troll. It's a mix of fantasy and sci-fi, where the fantasy elements come from this sci-fi capsule. That lets you have a full immersive VR experience. The game itself is really cool, but I love the freedom the players have. Mainly our main character, Dex, who basically chooses to be the villain of the game, as he allies himself with monsters and the devil himself to create all kinds of chaos for the rest of the players. It's a really fun series. And speaking of video games, surviving the game as a barbarian is sick. Instead of a capsule game though, it's a simple retro-style dungeon crawling computer game. If by simple we're talking about a ridiculously difficult and ruthless game that takes 10 years for our main character to beat, then simple. And not to mention, as soon as he gets to the final boss, the game sucks him into the world itself. To me, it's the perfect balance of isekai type series and reincarnation type series, where a main character gets thrown into a mysterious fantasy world, but also has more knowledge than he should. It's a really cool world with amazing characters alongside him. It's been great and beautiful so far, not to mention really brutal. And then we have what I believe to be the best fantasy series of 2023, I Was the Final Boss. It's a reverse isekai, but instead of hunters going around and saving the world, it follows the final boss of a dangerous tower, Baphomet. His love for fighting hunters, the disillusionment he has with his position, his longing for freedom, and finally, when he gets that freedom, he reincarnates as a human and now has to live life as one. It's great. Personally, I think I Was the Final Boss is probably one of the best fantasy series that came out this year. But there's another series that I love for some weirdly similar reasons. A martial art master wakes up as a concubine has probably one of my favorite female leads ever. Our main character dies. She's a notorious master of the more devious side of the martial arts world, but she wakes up in the body of a concubine of the emperor, and she is amazing. No joke, she constantly makes me laugh. I love strong female leads. I'm the Queen of This Life has become one of my favorite series ever, but I'm kind of mad at it right now because it broke my heart. But I love female leads that are cool, clever, and cunning, but why is this chaotic, fun-loving gremlin energy only seen in our male leads? Like, Plus 99 Reinforced Wooden Stick, or The Greatest Estate Developer, or of course, I Was the Final Boss. Give me more of that in our female leads. It's great, it's fantastic, chef's kiss. Having that kind of chaotic gremlin energy contrasting the very drama-filled politics of concubines, emperors, and kingdoms makes this series so refreshing and hilarious to read. And that closes out the 2023 Webtoon year. Honestly, it was a great year. A lot of fantastic series came out, and I'm thankful to be part of a community that gets to share the love for these fantastic series. And I'm really excited to see what comes out in 2024. Who knows, we might find the new best webtoon of all time going into this new year. But what are some series I missed? I might be able to read a lot of webtoon series, but I can't read them all. So if I missed your favorite webtoon of the year, leave it in the comments down below. And here's to 2024.